Let's talk about salmon, a fish that's not just delicious but also a symbol of national pride for Norway and a key player in global trade. But in this story, salmon became much more than a meal. It became a pawn in a high-stakes diplomatic game, all because of a single, controversial award. In 2010, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo, a Chinese dissident and outspoken advocate for human rights, who was imprisoned for his activism. To the Chinese government, this was not a gesture of peace, but a direct challenge to their authority and a public humiliation on the world stage. Beijing wasted no time. Officials condemned the decision, warning Norway that there would be real, tangible consequences for what they saw as an unforgivable insult. Norwegian diplomats tried to explain that the Nobel Committee was independent, separate from the government. But to China, these were just excuses. In Beijing's eyes, Norway was responsible, no matter what technicalities were offered, and when a superpower feels slighted, the fallout can be swift and severe. China didn't just voice its anger, it decided to make Norway feel the pain in a way that would hit home. Instead of public speeches or official sanctions, China targeted something close to Norway's heart and wallet, its world-famous salmon industry. Norwegian salmon, a staple in sushi bars and restaurants across the globe, suddenly found itself blocked from one of its biggest markets. This was no longer just a political spat, it was a battle over fish, money, and national reputation. The stage was set for a diplomatic standoff that would drag on for 6 long years, with both sides refusing to back down. Norway was about to discover just how costly a Nobel Prize could be, far beyond the world of politics and deep into the pockets of its fishermen and exporters. The message from China was unmistakable: cross us, and you'll pay the price, right down to your last fillet of salmon. And so began one of the strangest, most unexpected trade disputes in modern history, where a peace prize led to a cold war over fish. How do you punish a country with fish? China gave a masterclass in subtlety. No official sanctions, no public bans, just endless red tape. Norwegian salmon shipments faced bizarre, lengthy inspections at Chinese ports. Crates of fresh fish sat for days, spoiling on the tarmac, under the guise of safety checks. Shipments rotted, costing exporters millions. Meanwhile, salmon from other countries breezed through customs. Norwegian exporters couldn't prove they were targeted, but the pattern was obvious. The result: Chinese importers stopped buying Norwegian salmon altogether. The market for fresh Norwegian salmon in China collapsed overnight. It was a silent, devastating blockade. No declarations, just economic pain. Norway's most prized export was now persona non grata in the world's biggest market. Before the Nobel Prize controversy, Norway was the undisputed king of the Chinese salmon market, holding over 90% of the market share. Norwegian salmon was a symbol of quality and luxury, gracing the shelves of high-end supermarkets and restaurants across China. Business was booming, with hundreds of millions in annual sales flowing into Norway's economy. Salmon exports became a pillar of Norwegian-Chinese trade, supporting thousands of jobs and entire coastal communities. But after the diplomatic blockade, Norway's share plummeted to just 29% in only 3 years. The sudden collapse sent shockwaves through the industry. Exports of fresh salmon fell by a staggering 92%. Shipments that once arrived daily now sat idle. And fresh fish was left unsold or wasted. The financial hit was staggering, up to $3 billion lost in the salmon industry alone. Factories slowed, workers faced layoffs, and businesses struggled to survive. The wider economic impact was even greater, with over $5 billion in lost exports across multiple industries. Norway's export-driven economy felt the pain far beyond just seafood. This wasn't just about fish. It was a national economic crisis that forced politicians and business leaders to rethink their global strategy. Norway's prosperity was suddenly at the mercy of a single trading partner's anger. The risks of relying so heavily on one market became painfully clear. The lesson was brutal. Economic dependence can turn overnight into economic disaster, leaving businesses and families scrambling for answers. Even years later, Norway's exports to China hadn't fully recovered. The scars of the collapse lingered, and rebuilding trust proved slow and difficult. The Nobel Prize had become the most expensive award in Norwegian history, costing the nation far more than anyone could have predicted, all because of a decision made by an independent committee, one that would change the fate of an entire industry. The true cost, far more than anyone in Oslo could have imagined, serving as a stark warning for nations everywhere. When Norway was pushed out, the salmon market didn't wait. The Faroe Islands, tiny neighbors of Norway, suddenly became China's new favorite supplier. Their salmon, nearly identical to Norway's, sailed through customs with no trouble. Scottish and Chilean producers also jumped in, grabbing market share. For Norway, it was salt in the wound, watching rivals profit from years of their hard work. Some Norwegian salmon still reached China, rerouted through countries like Vietnam, but this workaround was costly and inefficient. Chinese consumers still wanted Norwegian salmon, but politics forced it on a global detour. The market had moved on, and Norway's dominance was gone. In global trade, nature, and business abhors a vacuum. The fallout wasn't just economic, it was political ice age. China froze all high-level contact with Norway. Trade talks were abandoned, meetings canceled, and Norwegian officials blacklisted. Even ordinary Norwegians found it harder to get visas. China made a point. Norway was excluded from new visa-free travel policies. The Norwegian ambassador in Beijing went years without a single official meeting. His term was extended just to avoid a diplomatic vacuum. China's message was clear. Challenge us and you'll be isolated. The freeze was a warning to the world. Don't cross China on sensitive issues. Norway became a global example of the cost of defying Beijing. The salmon dispute was just the start. The real punishment was diplomatic exile. For 6 years, Norway was left out in the cold. The world was watching and taking notes. After 6 long years of diplomatic chill, Norway found itself desperate to thaw relations with China. The economic and political costs had become impossible to ignore, and the pressure was mounting from both the public and the business community. The Norwegian government began making quiet, strategic concessions, carefully avoiding any moves that might anger Beijing. Every decision was weighed, every statement measured, as officials tried to find a way forward without losing face. When the Dalai Lama visited in 2014, Norwegian leaders made the controversial choice to refuse meeting him, a clear signal to Beijing that Norway was willing to prioritize its relationship with China over symbolic gestures. Behind the scenes, Norwegian diplomats worked tirelessly to rebuild trust, holding countless meetings and back-channel discussions to repair the fractured relationship. Finally, in 2016, a breakthrough arrived. Norway and China announced a full normalization of relations, ending years of diplomatic isolation. The joint statement was a carefully choreographed piece of diplomatic theater. Norway promised to respect China's core interests, a phrase loaded with meaning for both sides. There was no direct apology, but the message was unmistakable. Norway had learned its lesson and was ready to move forward, albeit with greater caution. With political ties mended, the lucrative salmon trade was finally reopened, bringing relief to Norwegian exporters and signaling a return to business as usual. Norwegian leaders wasted no time, sending delegations to China, eager to promote their products and rebuild economic bridges that had been left in disrepair. The blockade was over, but the price was clear. Norway would have to tread carefully around China's red lines, always aware of the risks of crossing them. Norway was back in business, but this time with a new sense of caution and humility, knowing how quickly things could change. The memory of the freeze would linger for years, serving as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between principle and pragmatism in international relations. What's the real lesson from Norway's salmon saga? Economic dependence on a single, powerful partner is risky, sometimes catastrophically so. Norway's billion-dollar industry vanished overnight because of a political dispute. Trade is never just about business, it's a tool of power. If you rely on one market, you're vulnerable to sudden, devastating retaliation. The story is a warning for any country deepening ties with a superpower. You can reroute fish, but not your power grid or critical infrastructure. The risks of dependence go far beyond spoiled salmon. Norway's experience is a microcosm of 21st century geopolitics. Prosperity and vulnerability go hand in hand in a globalized world. For Norway, the Nobel Prize cost 6 years, and billions in lost trade. For the rest of us, it's a billion-dollar lesson, served with a side of salmon.